Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video is about Ezekiel chapter 16 through chapter 20. And I'm just going to summarize this. If I have time later on, I'll take it chapter by chapter. But they've been doing things in a way that seems like they might cause the death of my flesh soon. I'm not worried about that. Now, I'd like to remind you again that when you look at the Bible, keep in mind they've superimposed the Jewish people, or the Jewish people that come to mind when you hear the phrase Jewish people, on the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. But it's more complicated than that, right? Because when you're in the divine order, you're actually in the order of God. And in the story, the Jews are almost all outside of the divine order. They're almost all going to hell in the story. So they superimpose, you might say, on the Igbo people. It's more specific than that. Certainly on certain black African people who are in a close relationship with the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, then those who are right with God those who are right with God are in the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order, right? So their groups are superimposed on that idea. Okay, so when we look at Ezekiel, Ezekiel 16, for example, where it's about them prostituting themselves to other ideas, it's superimposed on a group that's actually right with God. I can't stress that enough, okay? And I use the Bible for more than one reason. One, because everyone understands things relative to the Bible these days, so to speak. Like, they don't understand African martial arts. So if I start talking in those terms, people aren't likely to listen to me. But when I point to the Bible and in my videos are titled Ezekiel and so on and so forth, they start to correct their mistake. In the Bible it says, you know them by their works. There's people who are really of the synagogue of Satan that claim to be Jews and are not. Christ defines himself as the way, the truth, and the life, as a character in the story, right? And the life is also said to be the light of the world in the book of John. So the way, the truth, the life, the light of justice, Isaiah 51:4, the light of God, what have you. The light of God is the light of true justice. So you have to interpret it within the boundaries of righteousness and justice, as it says in Isaiah 28:17. Okay. And in Proverbs it says in more than one place that God despises dishonest scales. And we see in the New Testament in Galatians 3:28, it says there's no Jew or Gentile. There's just those who are doing the right thing and those who aren't. And of course in the Bible it says the Spirit is everything, the flesh means nothing. So to understand Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel 17, you have to understand that the story is not directly including, in a way that you can easily understand, the people who are really chosen by God. And I think these days everyone just understands that right away. And they look at Israel, they look at the Jewish diaspora, and they know that these people aren't chosen by God. No offense to anybody, but it's just obvious, okay? Now, these people also, these rich whites, rich Jews, rich LGBT people who are persecuting me, they also are persecuting Christians in Nigeria. Again, my kingdom is not of this world. I'm not from the pagan system of Nigeria, the fake Christian system of Nigeria. Okay, I'm not from the fake Christian system. Many people in this world, and so they're just making a fool of themselves, right? There's nothing they can do to coerce me. I'm willing to die for God. I'm willing to suffer for God, what have you. But they sink to that level. So when you look at Ezekiel, and it talks about they're prostituting themselves to the Egyptians and the Assyrians, right? And in chapter 16 and chapter 17, it talks about how the people in the story have betrayed Babylon and the king of Babylon and went to Egypt for help. And they're, using symbolism, right? The vine, the eagles, what have you. There isn't too much more to it than that, right? It goes into detail, even about the genitals of the Egyptians, right? But that helps you understand who was who, right? That helps you understand that these guys are black and so on and so forth. Okay, we have the statues in Europe, and we can look at the size of people and the shape of people and think about proportions, and we know that that's referring to black people first and foremost, and mulatto people, right? I mean, again, I don't care whose dicks are bigger than whose. Some people are immature and they care about that. I care about the facts and the evidence here. Okay. So it, it talks about how they took on the ways of the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the other people in the area, really the Philistines, the Edomites, what have you. The Hittites are there to some degree, Amorites, for various reasons, and other people in the area, Ammonites, whoever else. And they start worshiping the deities, and they start having sex with these people. They start sacrificing food to idols to these people. They start teaching their kids to find their lives in the world by assimilating to the cults in the area. This is what everyone in the world is doing wrong. They're trying to find their life in the world first and foremost, right? Instead of obeying God through me and being right with God. And that's what Ezekiel chapter 16 and chapter 17 is about. Okay, so in chapter 18 it talks about how the righteous person goes to heaven because of his faith and his righteous acts. And it specifically highlights his righteous acts. And it says that if a righteous person is the son of a wicked person and he turns to the Lord, right, he repents and obeys God through me, then he goes to heaven. But notice he's talking about within the boundaries of doing so before my flesh dies. Okay. At one point it brings up how people are turning to the idols of Israel, right? They're trying to find their life within the cultures of Israel instead of obeying God. And so after my flesh dies, everyone's culture will be in the culture of the idols of Israel. There'll be no way for them to turn and repent. And I bring this up again and again. This is one of the biggest misconceptions in the Bible. People think that no matter what happens, they can just pray and they'll be fine. That's not the case. Ezekiel chapter 18 goes into detail about, to some degree, right, about what it means to be righteous, right, to not oppress anybody, to care about the poor, to help the poor, to not be an idolater, to not steal, right? So they're cheating me, they're idolaters, they're not caring about the poor because they're not obeying God through me in order to give the poor the bread of heaven, which is more important than the bread, of this world, the material bread that, sustains your flesh. So it talks about that, and it goes into detail about chapter 19 talks about how there's a lament for the princes of Israel, that they fail, they turn into idolaters, what have you. Okay. Now, at times it gets a little bit hard to reconcile, but it's not that hard to reconcile. The Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order came through the Igbos at some point, okay, and there wasn't always an Igbo tribe. There was some tribe before that, or what have you, depending on how you define an Igbo. And so what ends up happening is there's a bunch of people that go astray. So right now in Nigeria, there's people who call themselves princes and kings and priests and what have you, and none of them are obeying God through me, right? And so there's that argument. But again, there's no Jew or Gentile. In a sense, there's no Igbo and no non-Igbo. There's just people who obey God through me and people who don't, right? Because the spirit is everything. The label, the tribe, the flesh, these things aren't so important unless they're connected to the Royal African Falcon Martial Art Order. And of course, after my flesh dies, that's it. No one's going to continue my work. There'll be no successor because the lack of success among other people. Okay, so chapter 20 is important, but you have to understand it correctly. In chapter 20, God makes it clear that he intends to purge the whole human race of anyone who is not obeying his laws, right? His universally and morally precise laws. Okay, universal pinpoint and moral precision is the law of God. And that's what the Bible is about time and time again. It also says that for those who are confused about this because their evil hearts have blinded them to this, right? They're going to be destroyed by God's mighty hand, his outstretched arm, what have you. And they'll be brought into the idols of the world, okay, and the churches and the government. They're not supposed to do this. They're supposed to accept my boundaries in regards to this. And they're supposed to be, they're brought into the idols of the world, and then God executes judgment on them based on that, right? So say you worship Baal or Zeus or Asherah or Dagon or Chemos, right? And you have a certain cult or a certain religion or a certain atheist movement. Atheism is also a form of following false idols, right? They have certain social orders, certain authors, what have you, certain groupings. And relative to that, it's how much you suffer, and then from there, you go to hell. Now, people often make this a huge mistake in the Bible. Probably the biggest mistake they make is they look at things in terms of this world. When it says, bringing people to the promised land, it's not talking about Israel and the Middle East. Okay, Galatians 4, Jerusalem with God is the mother, is the land, not Jerusalem in this world. When Martin Luther King said he'll get to the promised land with his followers, he wasn't talking about Jerusalem in this world. If he was, he lost his mind or something. You could tell in his last speech, he says, I'll get there with you. He's not talking about something in this world. It's mere dirt on the ground, something that's sacred? No. It is the Spirit that makes the land sacred. The Spirit is everything. The flesh means nothing. The Spirit is everything. The land in this world, the physical land, means nothing. And that includes, when God's purging out the wicked, that includes people who think that the land is sacred. Okay, the land is a place where animals, go to the bathroom, where blood has been shed, people have been raped and killed. Okay, it's not this spiritually pure place that cannot be touched by human wickedness. The kingdom of heaven is pure. It's holy, right? That's why they call it pure water, holy water. So there's the holy water of God, and there's the water that is the peoples, the nations, the multitudes, and language. So you and your spirit and your soul could be impure. It could be made pure by obeying God through me, and then it joins the holy water, and all those impurities are purged out. And so it is with the earth. The earth is impure. It's defiled. That's what it says in Isaiah 24. And it sinks never to rise again. The spiritual state of the earth will never be holy again. The earth may be destroyed one day, and it's plundered from there by the universe, what have you, and then maybe made into something else pure. But the earth as it is, the earth as a globe, will always be defiled because the righteous were killed. And the spiritual realm is where the promised land is. Okay, so they stay fuming me around the clock because they like to pretend that they're magically superior, right? But you see right there on the screen, Galatians 4, the children of the flesh, they're going to hell. They cling to the flesh. They keep saying, hey, this is our identity. Regardless what that identity is. You could be black and if you make that mistake, you're in trouble, right? You could be Jewish, you could be whatever. But those who are in the spirit of universal pinpoint and moral precision, the kind of morality that no one has a counter-argument for, regardless of, if they're an atheist, if they're this, or they're that. That is the promise of universal pinpoint and moral precision, and God is the source of the spirit of universal pinpoint and moral precision. And that comes with morally precise commandments and laws from God. And the throne is established in justice. And I've established the throne in focus, moral intensity, universal pinpoint and moral precision, etc., which means righteousness and justice. I've established the throne as the top martial artist ever possible, universally speaking, the one God set apart. And that is reality. That is the truth. And therefore, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the light of the world, and the gate in which God's divine verdicts come through. And you see that my logic is sound. So you get all these witches saying, here, and they're trying to hack my brain. But when the logic is sound, that is the path that you must go on. You're going to trust your mere feelings when your brains are also being manipulated by the state? Or do you trust logic? What does the wise person do? They follow, what do you find reliable? Those who lie? The witch who says here, because she's some kind of idiot who is focused on things in this world? Or do you trust the top martial artist ever possible and his argument that logic and God made him the top martial artist ever possible? Morally precise logic, universal pinpoint and moral precision.